Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Genuine Questions. For this video, I want to recap the previous videos that I've made on this channel because a couple of them have come back up in the news recently. And I started getting interested in the news or politics, whatever, when Seth Rich was murdered, and the news and the police and the political establishment quickly blamed it on a botched robbery, despite there being absolutely no evidence of that, and they never caught anybody. Like, why do you have to assign a motive to it, especially one with no evidence, and you haven't arrested anybody? Why not just leave it a cold case? So evidence had started to come out that he was actually the insider that hacked into the DNC emails, and the DNC killed him and then blamed it on Russia. And that started to come out. And Hillary Clinton helped fund the Steele dossier to help frame Trump for being a Putin puppet, and the FBI, they just went along with it. And the media went along with it, and they weren't asking any questions about Jeffrey Epstein, and all of the people that went to Jeffrey Epstein's island weren't held accountable for. And there's all this fake news going on that every time the media gets it wrong, they always get it wrong in the same direction. And the things that they're interested in digging deeper into always benefit one side. And the things that they're interested in covering up or ignoring also benefits that same side. So looks like the media is in on this establishment corruption along with the politicians. And then so I started looking back into history, started to see that seemed like maybe the American government killed John F. Kennedy, and maybe the Bush family might have had something to do with 9/11. And then they're like going all out to try to discredit Trump and impeach him, and they have these like ridiculous witnesses that there's absolutely nothing that Trump did wrong. But then we get stuck with Joe Biden as president, and we have COVID, and all of these like tyrannical government officials are not even following their own rules. And then you have the insurrection that happened, and they were able to paint all the Trump supporters. It's like these horrible domestic terrorists and lock up their political enemies. Then you have people like Bill Gates who are investing in vaccines and then have a undue amount of influence in the global health system. So all of it seems to tie together in this big web of corruption. And the two that have come back up in the news lately are, the first one I want to talk about is the January 6th. So what annoys me about this new interest in January 6th with these tapes that were released to Tucker Carlson and he's showing on his news program, it's like a year ago I made a video on this channel that I showed basically a lot of that same footage. So it wasn't this secret that had been unearthed that the Republicans are now releasing because they're the good guys. These videos were actually first published, as you'll see in the watermark on the video that I'm going to show. They were published by the New Yorker at the time. So it wasn't that hard to find, and they paint this very different picture of what actually happened on January 6th. So I'm just going to show you the clip from the previous episode that I did on this about a year ago that kind of takes the wind out of the Tucker Carlson's tape sales. So if you go back to 1930s Germany and Hitler's rise to power, there was an event that I'm not going to pronounce, but it's like Reichstag fire. But basically what Hitler and the Nazis did was they lit this government building on fire, and then they blamed it on their political opposition, and then used that to use the propaganda and the media to point the finger at them and be like, oh my gosh, they're violent, they're dangerous, they're the bad guys, we need to shut them up and get them out of society. And that's how Hitler is able to take over in the early stages of his political rise. And history does repeat itself, so I don't think we can necessarily rule out that that's not what January 6th was all about, was something orchestrated by the people who claim to be the victims of it. So like in this case, the Democrats, to put it simply, but the interests of the career politicians at large, it was in their best interest to shut Donald Trump up off of social media. If he doesn't have social media and they ban him from speaking like that, then everything that he says to the public has to go through the filter of the news media before we get to hear it. So you've essentially put a muzzle on this guy on his way out of office. And it would be a genius way to do that if that's what you were doing, because you've convinced roughly half the country that you're 100% justified in what you've done. And I want to show you some videos of things that happened inside the Capitol while this supposedly deadly riot was going on, which brings us to the Q shaman guy who comes in. He is not with this group of people. He's walking around like by himself with his own professional photographer doing like staged photos. And you can tell that this group of other people who are down in the Senate chamber, they're annoyed by him and they're like, you're making us look bad. Like, shut up. You're so annoying. They're not all part of the same group. This guy's not the leader of this rebellious group of Trump supporters. He's this weird dude walking around by himself that's the only one that just happens to have a professional photographer with him.
There's gotta be something in here we can fucking use against these scumbags.
Quit acting a fool, man!
America's a republic. Oh no, this is good stuff.
Hey! Quit acting a fool!
No, this is good. This is all good. This is talking about
And then when you look at these photos right here, this is like the main photo that you find when you Google that day. This is their big poster propaganda photo that they use of this big insurrection, but it's a staged photograph. What kind of insurrection is that where they stop in the hallway to pose for a group of professional photographers? And as you can see, that's exactly what they are. There's 2 camera lenses right there in the bottom of that picture frame. So there's a group of professional media photographers that have been brought in to take pose stage photographs of the insurrectionists. And I'm not supposed to think that this is somehow media propaganda put on by somebody. And when you think who benefits from this media propaganda, oh, it's the Democrats. It's the people that want to get Donald Trump kicked off of social media. So I just find it convenient that about 6 months before the election, you have this guy who's this obnoxious caricature of a QAnon Trump supporter, and he's on the local Arizona news rallies. It's like this, the face of the Trump supporters.
Yeah! Thank you, President Trump! Thank you, Q! America! Land of the free, home of the brave!
And so is that another instance of what we were just talking about, where you pay somebody to go and pretend to support someone else and have them act like a jackass, so then you can point to him and be like, look at that jackass, he supports Donald Trump. They all must be jackasses. And then he is the one person that's being followed around with the camera crew, and it's just in the perfect time for HBO to be doing their documentary, like hit pieces on the Q movement, where now they have this crazy mascot that they can use for propaganda. And of all of the people that are walking around in the Capitol who happen to get a police escort that day, it just so happens to be that guy. There is a cop walking him around, letting him go up and take a picture in Mike Pence's chair, so he's not insurrecting or rioting or desecrating a property. there's a police officer there letting him do it. And in my opinion, when he walks into that room, the way he greets those Trump supporters is not buddies and friends and, oh, hey, I like you guys. I think he's being sarcastic and mocking them when he walks in. It's like, oh, yeah, some cool Trump supporters. You guys really like saving your country and stuff. Yeah, respect you. Yeah. That's what he's doing, in my opinion. You can watch for yourself.
Hey! Fucking hey, man. Glad to see you guys. You guys are fucking patriots. Look at this guy. He's got covered in blood. God bless him.
You good, sir? Do you need medical attention?
I'm good, thank you.
All right.
I got shot in the face. Where are you? I got shot in the face with some kind of plastic bullet.
Any chance I could get you guys to leave the Senate wing?
We will. I've been making sure they ain't disrespecting the place.
Okay, just want to let you guys know this is like the sacredest place.
I know.
Hey, no. I'm gonna take it. Sit in this chair because Mike Pence is a fucking traitor.
I'm making sure you guys don't do anything else. Now that you've done that, can I get you guys to walk out of this room, please?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I would greatly appreciate it.
Hey, come on, man.
I feel like you're pushing the line.
Hey, come on, man. I am.
Even if I am wrong and this guy does love Donald Trump, he still did have a police escort and he wasn't being stopped from doing anything that day. All they did was go down to the Senate chambers and pray. So what is exactly the point of charging this guy and making him this like sole media poster boy as like this violent Q crazy conspiracy theorist insurrectionist? If it was so violent and deadly, don't you have anybody else that you would put up to be the headline cover story for this event? But instead you're going with this crazy guy who was basically walked around with the red carpet that day. But I want to show you this video right here of the police actually moving the barricades to let these Trump supporters come in a single file line. So they're not attacking the police and beating them over the head with fire extinguishers and stuff. The police actually move the barricades and wave them in. And you can watch it happen right here in this video.
U.S. Capitol Police, they're going to have to answer a hell of a lot of questions because this is a video where they had barricades where they literally removed the barricades and allow these people to come onto the premises. What the hell is the point of barricades, D?
So the other topic that we had previously talked about on this channel, that it's not just me complaining that I covered it a year before Tucker Carlson did, but there's more of an actual point to why I want to bring it up again. And it's the congressional hearings that they had about the Twitter files that were released. How the government and the intelligence agencies were colluding with Twitter and probably all the other social media companies too, but colluding with, in particular, Twitter to silence and censor people. And I want to show you some clips from that congressional hearing where two of the reporters who wrote some of the Twitter files and looked through the material, they're testifying. The first video that I want to show you is just explaining some of the allegations and like an overview of what the drama or the controversy is with the Twitter files. And Jim Jordan explains it where about a year before the Hunter Biden laptop story happened, people from the FBI were letting Twitter know that there's going to be a hack, and computer hack. It will be in October right before the election, and it's going to involve Hunter Biden. And when asked under oath, that FBI agent was asked under oath, what evidence did you have at the time to justify giving Twitter that warning? And he said he didn't have any. There was none. So what an amazing coincidence that with zero evidence, they were able to guess the exact time, person, and scandal that was going to happen, and started prepping Twitter that it was all going to be Russian misinformation.
In the run-up to the 2020 presidential election, FBI Special Agent Elvis Chan, in his deposition in Missouri versus Biden, said that he repeatedly informed Twitter and other social media platforms of the likelihood of a hack and leak operation in the run-up to that presidential election. He did it even though there was no evidence. In fact, he said in his deposition that we hadn't seen anything, no intrusions, no hack, yet he repeatedly told him something was coming. The expectations of a hack and leak operation were discussed throughout 2020, and he was told they would occur in a period shortly before the 2020 presidential election, likely in October. And finally, he said, I also learned in these meetings that there were rumors that a hack and leak operation would involve Hunter Biden. No evidence, but the FBI knows what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and who it's going to involve. Now, that's amazing. That is amazing to me. Maybe they get the time right. We're kind of used to October surprises every 4 years. So maybe they get the time right, but they got the time, they got the method, and they got the person. That's amazing. It's almost like these guys were clairvoyant. How did they know? Our government built a cozy relationship with big tech. They primed him for a hack and leak operation. They funded the think tank, which further primed big tech and big media. They leaked information to undermine the good work of 2 United States senators. And then 51 former Intel officials closed the deal with their letter. As Mr. Schellenberger pointed out in his reporting, the information op was run on us, run on we the people. And if that's not the weaponization of government, I don't know what is.
So another issue that came up during the congressional hearing was that the FBI was spending a lot of time and taxpayer money, but a lot of hours in their day were spent going through Twitter and then reporting what they deemed to be violations of Twitter's terms of service to Twitter and suggested that Twitter take them down, which Twitter typically, if not always, complied with those requests. But as they're going to point out here in this video, it's not the FBI's job, it's not the government's job to be policing Twitter's terms of service.
In your testimony describing the cooperation between the federal government and tech companies like Twitter, you stated, quote, a focus of this growing network is making lists of people whose opinions, beliefs, associations, or sympathies are deemed to be misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation, end quote. What's interesting to me is that what is missing from that list is the word unlawful.
That's true, yes.
In Part 9 of the Twitter files, Mr. Taibbi notes that the main conduit sending requests to Twitter would routinely label these flags as violations of Twitter's terms of service. Mr. Taibbi, what was the approximate percentage of the FBI requests to Twitter being based on the justification that the tweet violated the company's terms of service?
That was a standard disclosure or a standard disclaimer in almost all the communications from the FBI to Twitter. There would usually be a line in there saying something like, for your consideration, we believe the following 207 accounts may have violated your terms of service.
Do you believe it's the FBI's responsibility to police the terms of service for a private company?
I do not. I think you cannot have a state-sponsored anti-disinformation effort and also without directly striking at the whole concept of free speech. I think the two ideas are in direct conflict, and this is a fundamental misunderstanding, I think, of a lot of the people who get into this world. Some of them, I believe, in a well-meaning way. I think they're actually trying to accomplish something positive, but they don't understand what free speech means and what happens when you do this. It undermines the whole concept that truth doesn't come from, isn't mandated, that we arrive at it through debate and discussion.
Well, in fact, wouldn't you agree with me that the First Amendment is broader than Twitter's terms of service?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
And wouldn't you also agree with me that the FBI is responsible for complying with the First Amendment, not Twitter's terms of service?
I would hope so, yes. Yeah.
So in this next video, they're going to talk about shadow banning, and when the FBI couldn't find a justification or a terms of service violation to ban somebody, they would just shadow ban them, just basically making it appear that you're on the platform and you're tweeting and posting messages, but they just never come up on anybody else's feed or timeline unless they go out and search for you. So you don't really know that your tweets are just going out into oblivion and nobody's seeing them. And they weren't just doing this to conservatives, but it was just populist voices that would talk about things that were outside of the acceptable mainstream narrative. And that acceptable mainstream narrative does change. So back in 2020, they said that there was no way that it could possibly be a lab leak, how COVID got out, and now people are at least like 50-50 on whether or not that's a possibility. A lot of people are pretty sure, if not definite, that it was a lab leak, but to give them the benefit of the doubt, we'll say that it is a 50-50 healthy debate that is going on, and that used to be something that you couldn't even talk about. So things do change with the times, and that is how you form new opinions and spread better ideas, is by being able to have this freedom of speech and open debate on both sides of the argument, and may the best argument win. That is why it should be anti-censorship. But it seems like a lot of people in government do want to use that power on us.
We, thanks to the Twitter files, know that Twitter executives were using the term visibility filtering, and that really, to the rest of the American general public, was shadow banning, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so this blacklist that was created that really was used to deplatform, reduce visibility,
Yes.
create lists internally where people couldn't even see their profiles. That was used against doctors and scientists who produced information that was contrary to what the CDC was putting out, despite the fact that we now know that what they were publishing had scientific basis and, in fact, was valid.
Absolutely. And not only that, but these are secret blacklists. So Professor Bhattacharya had no idea he was on it. I mean, this is East Germany Stasi kind of behavior. That's what this is. But even if it was totally wrong, it still deserved, I mean, this is the whole point of the First Amendment, is that
Absolutely.
I think we all have the experience of you're not right until you're wrong a lot. You know, you actually have to have that debate and that conversation. So by repressing that, we actually stifled, I think, a much broader conversation we could have had about how to effectively respond to COVID, because they were secretly blacklisting people like Jay Bhattacharya.
When it comes to the weaponization of government, this isn't Republican or Democrat issue. This is an American issue. You had individuals, millions of Americans, who in many cases were being mandated to take an experimental vaccine. And when those that wanted to consider taking it were trying to make an informed decision, you had opinions that were being silenced because it didn't fit a specific narrative pushed by the Biden administration, correct?
Absolutely correct. And that's why we use the language of disfavored ideas and disfavored people, because it doesn't fall neatly among left and right lines. If there's anything going on here, it tends to be more of a disproportionate blacklisting of more populist voices, or just ideas that we would consider slightly outside of the Overton window, the mainstream opinion at the time. But the Overton window moves. And so the idea that you're just going to narrow the entire what's acceptable on social media to what is mainstream at the time would basically freeze us and not allow the society to progress and for knowledge to grow and for the democracy to function.
And in this next video, they are going to talk about how the government was working with Twitter to censor true information about vaccine side effects. And why that's concerning is because a lot of people are debating on whether or not to take this experimental vaccine, and so you want to know all of the information, and you would want to know what the potential negative side effects are. It's part of, like we talked about previous episode, like the Nuremberg codes, like the medical code of ethics, that you have to give people informed consent and let them know what they're signing up for if they're going to participate in a human experiment. And that did not happen. And they do this, their justification for censoring this information is that we just might interpret it the wrong way. That's why in some of these fact checks that they put online, they label something as misleading, which means, well, it's technically true, we just don't want you to get the wrong idea and think the wrong thing about it. So it's really more of an opinion check that they're putting on it, because they feel like they have to coddle the public because people aren't going to be able to handle the truth with things. So they don't want you to get the wrong idea. And then one of these reporters, these journalists, talks about this slippery slope of censorship.
Just quickly, we found just yesterday a tweet from the Virality Project at Stanford, which is partnered with a number of government agencies on Twitter, where they talked explicitly about censoring stories of true vaccine side effects and other true stories that they felt encouraged hesitancy. Now, censoring true. Yeah, so they use the word true 3 times in this email. And what's notable about this is that it reflects the fundamental misunderstanding of this whole disinformation complex, anti-disinformation complex. They believe that ordinary people can't handle difficult truths. And so they think that they need minders to separate out things that are controversial or difficult for them. And that's totally contrary to what America's all about, I think.
And I think what Matt says is really important to understand. I mean, you go from a situation where we were fighting ISIS recruiting, and then it was Russian disinformation. And now they're in a situation where they're wanting to censor true information, accurate facts, because they're worried that people might behave in ways that they don't want them to. That involves mind reading at a level that is grossly inappropriate. I mean, I worry even about making this defense, because let's remember, the First Amendment protects our right to be wrong. It protects our right to lie. I mean, it's bizarre to me that we would need to make a defense of the First Amendment and remind people that we have a right to be wrong. And being wrong, as Matt was explaining, is a big part of being a human being and having a democracy. So this is disturbing and chilling, and you're absolutely right to be outraged by it. There needs to be a full truth and reconciliation that I hope everybody would appreciate having on this issue, because a lot of bad behavior has come out about what they've done.
So now I want to show some clips of the Democrat side of the argument and the way that they are defending the cause from their side of the aisle. And in this first one that I'm going to show you, the guy, I don't know if he was walked in the middle of the hearing or didn't listen to any of the other testimony that was being said, but he tries to dismiss this entire hearing and all of these Twitter file news reports and the concern about them, because the First Amendment and freedom of speech, that means the government can't censor you. It doesn't stop private companies from being able to do what they want. And literally the entire point of this hearing and the Twitter files is that it was the government using the social media companies as like a backdoor runaround to be able to conduct this censorship. So thanks for the constitutional fun fact, but it really is irrelevant to the issue at hand and what people are concerned about.
Just remind everyone that, of course, we all believe in the First Amendment, but the First Amendment applies to government prohibition of speech, not to private companies.
And then the other thing that he's going to go on to say is he's going to try to bully these reporters into like validating the impeachment charges against Trump and the Mueller report, and it's like mad at them because of their prior reporting that questioning some of the facts surrounding Trump's impeachment. I believe what they take issue with was the notion that Joe Biden fired the Ukrainian prosecutor because he was investigating Hunter Biden and the company Burisma, which Hunter was on the board of. And this is how this guy reacts to that.
As you said in your Twitter files, am I correct, that every single fact in the New York Post story was accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall that the first paragraph of that Post story said that then Vice President Joe Biden pressured Ukraine to fire its prosecutor general because he was investigating Burisma, where Hunter Biden was on the board?
Yes.
Okay. I have here, which I'd like to enter into the record, the Trump-Ukraine Impeachment Inquiry Report, 300 pages by the House Intelligence Committee. Did you review this report before you said that every fact in this story was accurate?
Without objection, the material be entered in the record.
Did I read that before I wrote the Twitter files? No.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm aware of its
If
content.
you read this, you would have known that every single State Department and Trump administration expert on Ukraine said that Vice President Joe Biden, in concert with the European Union and the IMF, was executing official U.S. policy by encouraging Ukraine to fire the prosecutor general because he was not prosecuting corruption and was not prosecuting companies like Burisma. So that story, notwithstanding your allegations, was false.
Their version of events here literally makes no sense. So according to them, because nobody disputes the fact that Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. So the Democrats are saying that Joe Biden fired this prosecutor because he wasn't investigating companies like Burisma. So you're cool with your son, you're the vice president, and you're cool with your son being on the board of a company that it is all of the European Union's global policy to get this company investigated and to get this prosecutor fired for not investigating this corruption, and you're cool with your son being on the board of it. That literally makes no sense. But that's the story that they're going with. So now I want to show the Democrats' opening statement that they had for this hearing. Because this woman is going to, or basically the Democrats' story that they're going with is that this is all just cherry-picked info, and these reporters are partisan political hacks, and the only thing that was going on with this communication between the government and Twitter was just about content moderation. And as we already discussed, it's not the FBI's job to help moderate the content of a social media company. So that's irrelevant. Then she's going to try to distract from the censorship issue, and she's going to try to make this somehow about like protecting user data or acting like that's somehow a bigger deal than the FBI colluding with a private company to censor free speech. And after years of crying that Trump was attacking the freedom of the press, they are now trying to downplay the fact that the government is using this backdoor channel to conduct censorship and that they are trying to intimidate journalists who are reporting on it. And somehow this lady keeps a straight face while saying that the Democrats don't engage in false narratives and they're just here to tell the truth.
Real evidence showed that there wasn't coordination between Twitter and the federal government, as they'd like the American people to believe, and that all the so-called Twitter files really showed was a discussion on content moderation, and that we only got a fraction of the discussion. And the Republicans have brought in two of Elon Musk's public scribes to release cherry-picked, out-of-context emails and screenshots designed to promote his chosen narrative, Elon Musk's chosen narrative, that is now being parroted by the Republicans because the Republicans think that these witnesses will tell a story that's going to help them out politically. On Tuesday, the majority released an 18-page report claiming to show that the FTC is, quote, harassing Twitter. Oh my, poor Twitter. Including by seeking information about its interactions with individuals before us today. The majority conveniently forgot to share with the public that in May of 2022, well before Musk acquired Twitter, the FTC had already fined the company $150 million for failing to safeguard users' data. Twitter had issues with FTC long before Musk bought the company, and there's nothing political about that. Mr. Chairman, Americans can see through this. Musk is helping you out politically, and you're going out of your way to promote and protect him and to praise him for his work. This isn't just a matter of what data was given to these so-called journalists before us now. There are many legitimate questions about where Musk got the financing to buy Twitter. We know for a fact that foreign countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and possibly even Russia and China are investors presently in Twitter. Do these countries now have access to private Twitter user data? What agreements has Elon Musk reached with them? I'm not exaggerating when I say that you have called before you 2 witnesses who pose a direct threat to people who oppose them. It's funny when people have to go through that. Exactly. This is unacceptable. I'm ready for it. I don't know if a lot of other people are. But just as it was unacceptable for Kevin McCarthy to provide 41,000 hours of sensitive security footage to a biased talking head in an effort to rewrite what happened on January 6th. This is a new Republican playbook, apparently. Risk American safety and security to score political points.
The gentlelady's words should be struck. We do not accuse witnesses of threatening others. That is out of line and outside the rules of this committee.
That, and I can have an opinion.
You don't get to determine what's struck down.
We know this is because at the first hearing, the chairman claimed that big government and big tech colluded to shape and mold the narrative and suppress information and censor Americans. This is a false narrative. We're engaging in false narratives here, and we are going to tell the truth.
Pretty much immediately, everything that lady says gets debunked. And she tries to say that these reporters are, partisan, they're Elon Musk chosen scribes. She acts like they have an agenda. Both of these men are actually Democrats. And, she also you can see the 2 witnesses react when she says it. She calls them so-called journalists. And so in this next clip, Matt Taibbi, one of the guys, is going to respond to that. But this just kind of shreds pretty much every defense that they had going for them in that opening.
My name is Matt Taibbi. I've been a reporter for 30 years and a staunch advocate of the First Amendment. Much of that time was spent at Rolling Stone magazine. Ranking Member Plaskett, I'm not a so-called journalist. I've won the National Magazine Award, the I.F. Stone Award for Independent Journalism, and I've written 10 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers.
Mr. Schellenberger, are you a Republican?
No, I'm not.
You got any, pro-Trump bumper stickers on your car?
I voted for Biden.
Voted for Biden. You know how many MAGA hats laying around your house, right?
I do not.
Yeah, but you said earlier, both you and Mr. Taibbi said this is the most chilling thing you've ever seen as journalists. Mr. Taibbi, the same thing. You're not a Republican either, right?
No, I'm not.
You didn't vote for, this is about protecting the First Amendment.
So now this next Democratic congressman basically going to smear these journalists and question their character and their integrity, and then really doesn't give them a chance to respond. And he does this all with the air as though he is just the champion of truth and the defender of democracy and justice. And it gives a really great soundbite to feed to the people, and they want to buy into that nonsense. But just the way that nobody who is truly after freedom and democracy and freedom of the press and all of those standard American values, not even American values, just human rights values. He just smears these hardworking journalists and is so rude to them, and that should tell you all that you need to know about this guy's motivations and character and integrity.
Now, Mr. Taibbi, I've read a lot of your work. I respect some of it. But you've cast a lot of doubt on Russian interference in our elections. And today, you have virtually alleged a vast government conspiracy to censor speech. But I can tell you that the threat to our democracy, I'm not asking you a question. I'll let you know when I do. I can tell you that the threat to our democracy is very real. We live in an information age where malign actors do want to use social media to influence our elections, both big the ones that you've spent a lot of time talking about, and small, like mine.
Mr. Congressman,
and it should be a bipartisan goal. No, you don't get to ask questions here.
Okay.
It should be a bipartisan goal that it may be possible that if we can take off the tinfoil hat, that there's not a vast conspiracy, but that ordinary folks and national security agencies responsible for our security are trying their best to find a way to make sure that our online discourse doesn't get people hurt or see our democracy undermined. And that the very rights that you think they're trying to undermine, they may be trying to protect.
Now, the next beacon of democratic integrity that I want to show you is Debbie Wasserman Schultz from Broward County, Florida. And she questions his integrity again and again, doesn't let him respond, keeps doing the, I'm reclaiming my time, and so she can get her soundbite allegation, smear somebody from her position as a U.S. Congresswoman, and then doesn't give them the chance to defend themselves. She criticizes him and acts like you shouldn't take his reporting seriously because he profited from doing this and he gained followers on his subscription, his Substack, where he posts his reporting and his articles, and that's what good journalists should do. She's acting like these people should be working for free. Like, of course, if you do good journalism and you're reporting the truth and talking about things that people care about and exposing corruption, you're going to get more followers. People are going to be interested in the story that you're talking about, and they're going to pay for your reporting. That's a natural consequence. That's not corruption. That's how it should work. And she's going to start here. The exchange that led him to answer this way is she's asking him if it's okay to report something if the source that gave you the information has like a motive for doing it. And here's how Matt Taibbi responds, which is a big duh, that everybody has a motive in some fashion for coming forward, whether it's just that they want to be a whistleblower and expose what's going on or whatever it is. Everybody has a motivation, something that is driving them to do something. So journalists, and it's your job to take that information and determine if it's true or not, and if it's of public interest, and report those facts to the public. But every source is going to have a motivation for wanting to come forward, obviously.
Congresswoman, I've done probably a dozen stories involving whistleblowers. Every reported story that I've ever done across 3 decades involves sources who have motives. Every time you do a story, you're making a balancing test between the public
reclaiming
interest.
my time. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I ask you this because before you became Elon Musk's hand-picked journalist, and pardon the oxymoron, you stated this on Joe Rogan's podcast about being spoon-fed information, and I quote, I think that's true of any kind of journalism, and you'll see it behind me here. I think that's true of any kind of journalism. Once you start getting handed things, then you've lost. They have you at that point, and you got to get out of that habit. You just can't cross that line. Do you still believe what you told Mr. Rogan? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes.
Good. Now, you crossed that line with the Twitter files.
No.
Elon Musk, it's my time. Please do not interrupt me. Elon Musk spoon-fed you his cherry-picked information, which you must have suspected promotes a slanted viewpoint, or at the very least generates another right-wing conspiracy theory. You violated your own standard, and you appear to have benefited from it. Before the release of the emails in August of last year, you had 661,000 Twitter followers. After the Twitter files, your followers doubled, and now it's 3 times what it was last August. I imagine your Substack readership, which is a subscription, increased significantly because of the work that you did for Elon Musk. Now, I'm not asking you to put a dollar figure on it, but it's quite obvious that you've profited from the Twitter files.
I've also reinvested.
You've made some. No. Is it true that you have profited since you were the recipient of the Twitter files? You've made money. Yes or no?
I think it's probably a wash, honestly.
No, you have made money that you did not have before, correct?
But I've also spent money that I didn't have
Okay.
before. I just hired a whole group of people to
Patently
investigate.
obvious answer, reclaiming my time.
So now in this next video clip, the U.S. Congresswoman is actually going to try to get this journalist to reveal his source for this information. That's like a big no-no. Journalists are never supposed to reveal their source. That's one of the marks of a journalist's integrity. Nobody's going to want to come and tell you things if you go around and tell everybody who your source was and put a target on that person's back. So the government is not supposed to be asking those types of questions and intimidating journalists in that fashion, trying to force them to reveal their sources. Comparison to it would be like the Fifth Amendment. If somebody chooses to not testify, you can't assume that that means that they're guilty. You can't use that against them. And the government here is trying to use the fact that Matt Taibbi won't reveal his sources to them as proof of who his source is. As proof of who his source is. And you can't just make those kind of assumptions. The government shouldn't be making those kind of assumptions just because somebody is not publicly, because a journalist is not publicly choosing to out their sources.
What was Mr. Musk approach you about writing the Twitter files?
Again, Congresswoman, that would...
I just need a date, sir.
But I can't give it to you, unfortunately, because this is a question of sourcing, and I don't give up. I'm a journalist. I don't reveal my sources.
It's a question of chronology.
No, that's a question of sourcing.
Because you earlier said that someone had sent you through the internet some message about whether or not you would be interested in some information.
Yes, and I refer to that person as a source.
So you're not going to tell us when Musk first approached you?
Again, Congresswoman, you're
Yes
asking me to
yes or
you're
no?
asking a journalist to reveal a
So
source.
then you consider Mr. Musk to be the direct source of all this?
No, now you're trying to get me to say that he is the source. I
Well,
just
it
can't answer
either
your
is or
question.
he isn't. If you're telling me you can't answer because it's your source, well, then the only logical conclusion is that he is, in fact, your source.
Well, you're free to conclude that.
Well, sir, I just don't understand. You can't have it both ways, but let's move on because...
Well, no, he can. He's a journalist.
No, he can't, because either Musk is the source and he can't talk about it, or Musk is not the source. And if Musk is not the source, then he can discuss
No one
his
has yielded. The gentlelady's out of order. You don't get
And
to
she's
speak.
out of order because he's interrupted.
Gentlelady's not
You're
recognized.
not recognized. Mike.
He has not said that. What he has said is he's not going to reveal his source, and the fact that Democrats are pressuring him to do so is such a violation.
We're asking him about his conversations with Musk.
And so, typical Democratic strategy, when all else fails, just try to blame Donald Trump. And so in this next clip, Matt Taibbi is bringing up some Democrats that he saw emailing Twitter for this content moderation or censorship. And the Democrat is like, nice try, this is about Trump. And then comes back to the guy who wouldn't shut up about Burisma. This is when he just can't let go of the Mueller report. And so these people still, after all these years, keep bringing up these irrelevant, debunked Trump scandals, like that somehow is relevant or has anything to do with the validity of the Twitter file emails that everybody can read for themselves. And again, they are incredibly rude to these witnesses who are just hardworking journalists who, to my knowledge, just report on bipartisan corruption.
But did you see that email exchange?
No, I have not seen an exchange from the Trump White House.
So
I have seen one from Congressman Schiff and one from Senator Angus King.
Yeah, nice try. We're talking about the Trump White House.
Because you said earlier, I believe, that you did not see Russia, you could not confirm that Russia interfered in our election in 2016, that you don't believe that. Is that your testimony here today? You don't believe that they did?
I think it's possible that they may have on a small scale, but certainly not to what's been reported.
What's been reported or what's been included in the indictments?
Well, again, indictments are allegations. They're not proof. And
I understand. It's a pretty detailed allegation.
In the Mueller indictment, by the way.
You should go read the indictment and then come back and tell us if you actually think there's no proof of it.
Well,
but let me move on.
Let me move on, please. By the way, when
please, let me move on. That's how this works. You should know that by now.
So there's a couple of other points that some people brought up during this congressional hearing that aren't, I guess, specifically about the specific ways that the FBI and Twitter and the other intelligence agencies were all colluding with each other, but these people just sort of touch on the big picture, the authoritarian threat that I talk about a lot on this channel. And censorship is one of the key pillars of authoritarianism, and that control over a population. And as you've seen throughout history, when corrupt people have control over the media and uses propaganda like that, they can convince the public to do some atrocious things to each other. And so in this first clip, this guy just makes a pretty good defense of the First Amendment and why it is important, and why the Twitter files show that the government is committing a huge violation of it.
Some of the defenders of big tech and the Biden administration, as we know, have worked very hard to cast doubts on the legitimacy of your reporting, and some have gone so far to state it's irrelevant if Twitter was suppressing speech in coordination with the federal government. But this morning, we saw a stunning display of their attack of your character. We shouldn't be surprised. This is what the defenders of big government corruption do. This is the playbook. They destroy the messenger. We just saw it here on live television, and everybody can see it for themselves. The Twitter files should be a matter of bipartisan concern for every member of Congress and every American citizen, because it is a bedrock principle of our constitutional system that the government does not get to decide what speech is acceptable or true. Under the First Amendment, Americans have a right to speak freely, regardless of whether their speech upsets the preferred narrative. In fact, that's when it needs the most vigorous protection. Everybody on the left used to believe in that, or at least they purported to. Government and media fact-checkers frequently get things wrong. The American people can't and shouldn't rely on so-called experts to be the arbiters of truth, disinformation boards and the like. It doesn't matter what political party you're in. Government should not suppress important debates and public discourse.
I've never worked on an issue where so frequently while doing it, I just had chills go up my spine because of what I was seeing happening. I never thought in my own country that freedom of speech would be threatened in this way. And it's just frightening when you get into it. We now know that the Department of Homeland Services, which has had, what's that? Security, sorry, Department of Homeland Security, had to try to create a disinformation board. That went away after public backlash, but we now realize that they have this other enterprise, and they've been building out basically mechanisms to proliferate a censorship industrial complex around the country to censor on a whole range of issues. And so you've seen this censorship industry go from, well, we're just fighting ISIS, to, well, we're just fighting Russian disinformation bots, to, well, now we need to fight domestic misinformation, which is just saying we need to fight against people who are saying things we disagree with online. That's all that means. And I mean, it's not a slippery slope. It's an immediate leap into a terrifying mechanism that we only see in totalitarian societies of attempting to gain control over what the social media platforms are allowing.
And so in this last video clip here, they're going to play some audio of a former State Department official who is also the guy who created the Global Engagement Center, and he is talking about the virtues of propaganda and how it's a good thing when governments weaponize it and use it against their people. And so these aren't just evil historical figures that were defeated 80 years ago and now like the good guys have been in charge of everything and everything's fine now. We still to this day have people in positions of power who are creating these global think tanks and organizations who support the idea that governments should be using propaganda against their own population.
And I want to introduce you to, or introduce the country to somebody else. I think you've mentioned it in one of your writings, Richard Stengel. You know who that is?
Yes, he's the former, the first head of the Global Engagement
I
Center.
want the American people to hear from him for 30 seconds.
Basically, every country creates their own narrative story. And you know, my old job at the State Department was what people used to joke as the chief propagandist job. We haven't talked about propaganda. Propaganda, I'm not against propaganda. Every country does it, and they have to do it to their own population.
Every country does it. Every country does propaganda, and they have to do it to their own people, is what Mr. Stengel said. If I understand correctly, he was the head of the Global Engagement Center at its creation, right?
He was, and in his book, Information Wars, there are a number of passages where he talks about creating a whole of government solution to the information problem. He hastened to say that he didn't want to create a quote information ministry, but what he was describing roughly approximates that.
And the nexus to authoritarianism is the desire to control the nature of truth itself. Our understandings change about things. We learn new things. We challenge prior assumptions. But if a bunch of people in Washington, D.C. get to decide what the truth is, and then enforce it on the country, and then punish and target those who report on their conduct, we are drifting more toward that.
Say what you want about Matt Gaetz. Typically he's a little obnoxious for my taste. I don't really know how I feel about him, but I wouldn't say my opinion is great, but I think he is spot on with those comments there. So, just because I don't like a person doesn't mean that I can't agree with things that they say from time to time. And one time at my old job, when I was talking to somebody about all of this stuff and like current events as it was going on, she would have not, this lady probably didn't, I don't know if she followed politics too much, like sort of peripherally. She knew what was going on, but just sort of knew these like basic surface mainstream narratives. But sometimes she would ask me questions about like what I thought about stuff. And one time she asked me like, how do you decide like which side's telling the truth? Like, how do you know who to believe? And I guess it's not really about just believing somebody because they're a Republican or a Democrat or because the news says that they're telling the truth. It's more, I just look for the people that ask the type of questions that I want to know the answers to. And it seems like Jim Jordan seems to be a guy that is interested in a lot of the same things that I am. And in terms of like a representative government, I don't need to want to hang out with these people. I want them to go to their jobs and ask the types of questions that I want to hear and I want to know the answer to. If you're not doing that, then why are you even up there? You're not representing the people. So, and it just seems like it works out a lot of times that most of the time I don't really care about what any of them are saying. There's rarely things that the Democrats say that I do agree with, and most of the time I don't agree with a lot of the Republicans, or I just don't think that they're asking like interesting questions that I really care about following those stories and wanting to know the answer to. But it seems like when it does happen, that there is a story that I'm interested in, and there is somebody that's up there that is probing those same areas of interest that I have, it just turns out it tends to be Republicans. So it's not really so much I believe that they're always telling the truth, but they're at least going down the directions that I find interesting and I want to hear what they have to say. That's all that I have for this video, and I will see you guys for another Genuine Questions video next week.